today, someone can write something up and upload it and have it reviewed and have it up there by the next day in Milan. What does that do to the scientific process?
Well, that's a really good question because there are pros and cons to that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's an extraordinary.
Yeah.
This is Ingrid Weigand, who runs all the science fairs here in Austin, and we're going to be talking science today. I'm very interested in science and,
Okay.
and what we're doing. So you started with Austin Energy, right? And you were in marketing with Austin Energy.
Correct.
At the time.
Yeah. And I should say I co-manage the Austin Energy Regional Science Festival. It is still owned by Austin Energy.
Mm-hmm.
I actually hired that person.
Yes.
Best decision I ever made. They have a fair director who's in charge of all scholastics.
Yeah.
And my foundation, the Austin Science Education Foundation, does the fundraising, the recruiting of judges and volunteers, the mentor program at low-income schools, middle and high schools, and community outreach, and I help co-manage the fair. But I got involved because at the time I was the manager of marketing communications at Austin Energy.
And this was in 1998? You preceded it.
I joined Austin Energy in 1998, but I should go back a step. The Austin Regional Fair was founded in 1956.
Mm-hmm.
So it's been around for a long time.
Wonderful.
And various entities from UT to AISD to private people have run it all this time until for whatever reason they needed to pass it on to somebody else. And at the time when I joined Austin Energy, first I was in the video department.
Yes.
I actually was the video department, I was it. There was a woman, Dr. Barbara Tenbrink, who ran the fair single-handedly.
Mm-hmm.
And Austin Energy had just become a sponsor, and as part of their sponsorship, they said, okay, we'll videotape it. We'll do interviews with the students. And then they turned to me and said, Ingrid, go find some students, interview them. And I remember sitting in the edit suite and running those answers from what the students had told me they were doing over and over and over until I could grasp what they were doing. And for the narration, I could sum it up in 1 or 2 sentences. And I had to ask a lot of questions.
Yes.
I do have a basic grounding in science because of my German school education.
Sure.
But as we said earlier, what the students now do in science is way beyond what they taught us in high school.
It's extraordinary.
Yeah.
So talk about the evolution from 1998. I mean, we're talking about like within 11 years ago, today in 2018, almost 2019, there were no smartphones. This was not, I mean, there has never been a technology that has more quickly been adapted by humanity than the smartphone. And yet it's part of us. So there's a real expansion in what we can be curious about and what we can. So can you talk about that evolution from the 90s up that you'd been seeing with the science?
Well, first off, I should say I'm not a scientist. I have a degree in literature.
But you are a journalist, and
a journalist
is an observer of the humanity of what we're doing. So I'm asking you more as Ingrid, the observer, than Ingrid, the scientist.
So everything has sped up tremendously. Knowledge just goes faster and faster. It gets shared more widely than ever before, and there are opportunities that people even 20 years ago would not have dreamt about. That is on the positive side. Yes. The way that information, first of all, can be gathered, and secondly, the way it can be shared and put out there is just totally astounding. And there are possibilities out there that are mind-blowing. On the other hand, because there is such a fast pace, sometimes you wonder how much review there is and how much thought goes into the development of science. And one example I was going to give you, are you familiar with Konrad Lorenz?
No.
He was a German-Austrian behavioral scientist. He did the very, very well-known experiment of raising a gosling with his children. And the gosling thought it was a child. And he came up with the whole idea of impressions and bonding.
Yes. Okay.
Yes.
Now you're.
So
now,
that's Conrad
now
Lawrence.
Yes, I'm understand. Thank
Yes.
you.
And he was, I didn't look this up before I came here because I hadn't thought about it, but I would say he was around in the 1930s, 40s, 50s as much.
Sure.
And I read him as a child because he was one of the first people who wrote popular science. He had a book called The Gosling Martina, and that's the gosling he had raised with his children. And I read that as a children's book, and I was so impressed. One thing that Conrad Lawrence said at the time, because already science was starting to speed up at that time, he said it used to be that you looked at inventions for one generation to see what the consequences might be.
Exactly.
We're not even talking about a year anymore. We're not even talking about months sometimes.
Nope.
And to give you an example of the other extreme, how fast things are going, the New Yorker, the November 23rd issue, had an article on neuroscience, of the intersection between neuroscience, computer, and engineering. And it had to do with implanting in somebody's brain a small apparatus that let them control a robotics arm. And this is something that scientists have been trying to do for a long time for people who are amputated or have injured, especially with all the war injuries. And the Department of Defense actually was funding it. So they did this experiment with a woman who was a quadriplegic, and she was able, with these implants, and they stuck out of her head like little horns, and she was very proud of them after a while. She was able to control the robotics arm to the point where she could feed herself a piece of chocolate, which had been her dream. Just the fact that because she was living in a wheelchair without any use of any limbs. She could use the joystick by using her chin to maneuver her wheelchair around. So for her, the fact that she was able to make her arm, and she came to think of it as her arm, that she was able to command it to feed her a piece of chocolate was amazing. And what the experiment was is, what is the thought process that triggers an action? What happens in your brain that tells, like you just did this with your arms.
Yes.
How did your arms know to do this? And how did your arms know to stay within the confines of your body and not go flailing out here? So something in your brain, some neurons fired and told some other part of your brain that you wanted to react. Actually, they reacted to something you heard. They sent some kind of signal down your arms and you moved your hands. And they still have not figured out what part of the brain controls what part of the body and how does this work. So the whole science experiment was, how can I, with my thought, control a robotics arm? So they were able to do this, which is wonderful. It is a huge step forward for people who are who are paralyzed or who are missing limbs. But here is the part where I'm getting a little bit concerned. They stopped the experiment with this woman, and they're now concentrating how in the future somebody in the army can use the same mind control to control a swarm of drones in warfare.
Exactly.
So it went away from something that most people would agree is a great advancement in healing to something that could be very destructive. And then the question always becomes, who makes these decisions?
Precisely. And how do we do it? Because everything is a double-edged sword.
Yes.
I mean, the invention of, we were able to use so much of our, you can use dynamite to blast, to create a dam, to create a reservoir, or you can use it to kill. I mean, we can use a knife in a surgeon's hand or in a murderer's hand is exactly the same tool, but it's the consciousness behind it that's going to do that.
And with the advancement of science, what you're also getting, it's the difference between somebody wielding a knife who could be very, very dangerous. I mean, the term amok comes from people who are running, who turn crazy and run around with a weapon, and they kill or damage whoever is in their way. But give that same person an AK-47 and they're doing so much more damage.
Exactly, and so we can mitigate the damage just by understanding what are the limits.
Because whatever the advantages in science were 200 years ago, they now have the opportunity to have so much higher consequences.
You know, and speaking of consequences, because I like that word, because the consequences are again, there are positive consequences and there are negative consequences. We can understand what they are. The kids that you see, are you seeing a broadening in their curiosity and the kinds of ideas that they're bringing to the science fair, the kinds of things that they're interested in doing? Are you watching a broadening of that, Ingrid?
Oh, they always do. So one thing that we see with students is that they are very, very aware of what's going on in the environment around them. So for an example, when we had the fires in Bastrop, we had a lot of projects the following year in plant sciences that had to do with how quickly can something burn out of a ground soil that had been burned. When we had the flooding in Del Valley, we had a lot of projects about how do you control water, how do you control floods. So students, middle and high school, and sometimes at the elementary level, they react to what's around. We get a lot of projects that have to do with environmental science, that have to do with renewable energy, that research cancer, that are looking for alternative homeopathic ways of maybe treating certain diseases. We're getting behavioral projects that are dealing with drug addiction, how to combat that. So at that age, it's all still thinking about what's possible, and it's pretty much, I would say, 105% positive. How can I make the world better?
How wonderful. And so what ages are that get involved in the science fair?
Our regional fair takes the winners from local schools, and we cover 12 surrounding counties, 23 school districts, private, public, charter, homeschools. We take them from 3rd grade through 12th grade. So we run an elementary fair, which is 3rd through 6th grade, because some elementary schools in Austin go through 6th grade. And then we run a junior, which is middle school, and a senior fair, high school, on a different day.
Well, I loved watching the video, the last video that you put up, in which I encourage anyone, please take a look at this, take a look at the video, because just listening to the kids articulate what they're postulating and what postulating that they're making, and then the tests that they're running, and it's so hopeful. I mean, it really brings.
And typically the projects that do the best are those that are grounded in some personal experience. So a student might have somebody in the family who suffers from diabetes.
Right.
So they want to do something. They want to do a test or a cure. At that level, they're all still talking about cures to everything.
Absolutely.
The most popular one is to find a cure for cancer.
Right.
So if they have a personal connection, there is a tremendous involvement on the part of the student.
Yep.
And what we like about it is that at that age, they still are not aware of limitations or boundaries.
Yes.
Especially at the elementary school. They just think, first of all, nothing has ever been done before. They're the first ones who are discovering that you can throw a magnet in a freezer or boil it, and is there a difference in how it then acts to other magnets?
Exactly.
They're the very first ones who ever did this. And secondly, they have no idea that there's some things they can't do.
How lovely.
Which is really wonderful.
I think about that, because what are the things that I have argued myself out of? And saying, oh, that's not possible.
Yeah.
Oh, that's not. Oh, you know, that's really too hard. That's really not something that I even want to think about. When is that true? And that's what I get from children. That's one of the things that I love about being able to have adult and children mix. Because we get an opportunity to be able to learn from one another and to be able to see, well, what are the things that I have that I can still gain from that? And that excites me about what you're doing.
And I want to give you another example on this. There is a wonderful documentary out right now. It's called Science Fair. It's distributed by National Geographic, and I think it's just finishing its theatrical run, so it'll be out on some kind of streaming service.
Wonderful. So
So, but there is one student that they featured who was at the International Science Fair, and I actually saw him when he won. So at the International Science Fair, to which the best students from each regional and state fair advance, they always select the very, very top prize is the Gordon E. Moore Award, the founder of Intel. It's a $75,000 cash prize to the very best of the entire 1,700 students from over 78 countries who participate. Goes to one student.
Wow.
Or maybe
so it's like a
to one project.
MacArthur Genius Grant.
So the student who won in 2016 was either a freshman or a sophomore. And he had developed a strip that could detect pancreatic cancer in hours and cost something like 10 cents to develop. And he had done that because, and I have to say, he won and he got a lot of publicity.
Yes.
And he is out there and he's still experimenting. It didn't work quite as well as he thought it would. It's still in development.
Yes.
But the fact is that those tests used to take a long time, were extremely expensive. And when he first started, because somebody whom he really loved died from pancreatic cancer, and he said, how come nobody tested for that when he first became sick? And he was told because tests are expensive, they take a long time. And he took 2 years, and I forgot how many labs and doctors he approached. It must have been hundreds that he wrote to, emailed to. He was told, can't do this, not possible, not talking to a high school student, da 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 da. He developed a test.
Yeah.
Because he wasn't going to take no for an answer.
But that's what I think that we can do, because I am very hopeful about where we're going. I'm including. I mean, I love the idea of how we're bringing science. So much of the science. It just astounds me. I have a dear friend of mine, Graham Bullen, who is a historical fiction writer, and he's in Scotland, and we talk once a week on the Skype, and to know that when I say a word, it goes into the computer and it disassembles and puts it into little packets, disassembles that and takes it, sends it underneath the ocean, and it goes back and goes into his computer, reassembles from those packets, and comes out in nearly real time. How is that not magic?
It is magic, and you always wonder, did Star Trek cause all that? Did somebody look at Star Trek or read the Harry Potter books and say, that's what I'm going to do?
Exactly, and that's what I think that's where I think the inspiration and the kids today can have a greater, if we're allowed now. Getting into the schools, there is a greater emphasis into the STEM training, right? And that we're the science, technology, and engineering and math. Are you seeing that?
Yes, there is. But there is also, because of the educational system, there is a huge emphasis on tests. And the scores will determine how a school is rated.
Absolutely.
So a lot of what we see in the classroom is a concentration on learning things that can be checked off in a multiple choice box.
Exactly. That's not critical thinking.
Which is not critical thinking. So the reason we like science fair, and I should give a shout out to the teachers, because those who do science fair do not get extra payment for that. A lot of them do it during lunchtime or before class or after class, give their students a chance to meet. There are some lucky schools that incorporate it in their curriculum, but a lot of the teachers do it outside of their regular responsibilities.
Wow.
So doing a science fair project leads to thinking outside the box. It is not what you can read and then check off a box. They really have to think things through. It also means that they have to learn how to project plan. So for example, this is my favorite speech to a middle school student who don't know anything about time management.
Yes.
So here it is, we're in November. The fair submission deadline is January 31st.
Wonderful.
You have to get all your research plan written, etc., before you may even start. You have to have permission from somebody before you can start. And you want to grow plants and see whether they go better with this fertilizer, that fertilizer, no fertilizer whatsoever. How long does it take for that plant to grow? Okay, it takes 3 weeks, meaning you have to have your result by then. When do you need to start if it takes 3 weeks for your plants to grow? Which to a middle school student is a revelation.
Absolutely.
Yes.
But
Yeah.
you're teaching, but time management and project management are such
They are so
big
important.
skills to
Right.
have in our lives.
Yeah, the other thing, and pretty much every single student hates this part, is the documentation. But if you do not learn how to write what it is that you're trying to do
Yeah.
and how you're going to do it, and then after you are done, if you cannot write an abstract that gives an overview of what you were trying to do, how you did it, what you learned, there are not many people that will listen to you when you have an invention.
Exactly.
And so the students have to learn a whole bunch of things in addition to doing the experiment, which is all they want to do. So after they've written their research plan, they have all their permissions, they do their projects, they get to do the board, which they love. Every student loves doing a board. But then they come to our fair and they talk to judges. And Donna is one of our judges. I
Donna
recruit
Cosper.
Donna Cosper,
Our
yes.
executive producer.
Yes. And I have to get about 350 judges just for middle and high school. And I have to get judges who are subject matter experts in 17 different science categories. And it ranges from animal sciences to behavioral to chemistry to biomedical to health to 3 different engineering categories, 2 different environmental categories, robotics, physics, plant sciences. Because when a student submits a project in one of those categories, the judges who talk to that student need to know more than the student does. Now, in middle school,
Absolutely.
that's manageable.
Sure.
Basically, any scientist can judge any category in middle school because it's basic science.
Absolutely.
But when you get to high school, some of the projects we get, especially in the last grade of high school, you better know your
Yeah.
stuff.
There's got to be a cross-pollination
Yeah.
there, though.
Yeah.
I mean, the scientists that get a chance to, and the engineers and the mathematicians that get a chance to work in this, they get inspired by the kids
Right.
who are, so there's a wonderful synergy there.
Right, and a lot of the judges who come back, we have quite a few returning judges, so I need 350 judges for the middle and high school. We do minimum 3 judges per project, and they judge and then form consensus of who
Yes.
should be first, second, third. So it's a lengthy process. But at this point, I have about 140 judges. I did my first call, and about 120 of those are returning judges. And some of them have judged for longer than 10 years, and they basically come back because they love the interaction with the students, and they always tell me it gives them hope.
Yes.
Right. So, and those are the kind of people we want to recruit because there are people who are stricter and say, you know, you should have known this, you should have done this. That's not what I need. What I need is people that listen, understand what the student has done, and give encouragement.
Yes.
And we do every year. We have some students who did not did not quite get the paperwork right, so they cannot advance, or they're doing it for the first time, or there's some kind of limitation. We tell the judges which those projects are, and we expect them to be extra kind. Because if somebody comes for the first time and does not have the confidence to begin with, they don't need to be told that they did something wrong. They need to be told that, yes, I see what you did, I really appreciate your effort,
Yes.
and I hope you will continue in the field.
Exactly. And that's
Yeah.
where I think that the entire science and positive psychology and appreciative inquiry, to be
Yeah.
able to inquire what went right, what did you
Right.
do that actually ended up developing, digging deeper, making this, to see what was going right. Because if you
Right.
can find that their curiosity, what was your original intent, and
Yeah.
then suddenly it opens up. I mean, it opens up, it becomes a learning experience for
It
everybody.
does. And speaking of what did you do right, that's another thing we have to overcome with, especially with middle school students. They have to have a hypothesis in the beginning. Here's what I think is going to happen.
Yeah.
If they were wrong, they are heartbroken. And part of the learning experience is like, no, if you're wrong, you just learned something.
What did
You
we
learned-
learn? We learned
We learned that if I do this and that, I'm not going to get this, I got this. Why did I get this? Why did I end up here? And every year at the International Science Fair, which is our reward every year, we get to take our top winners to the International Science Fair, which is 5 days of
Right.
amazing students. There is a Nobel laureate panel, and students can ask questions. They're pre-selected, and they will answer. And it doesn't matter what the students answer. The laureates have a tremendous amount of fun, and they just go and tell stories, war stories.
Yes.
But every year, at least one of them will say, the best inventions are those that were accidental. We were expecting X and we got Z, and everybody scratched their head and said, why did we end up with Z? What happened here?
Yes. And that's what we're, and you know, this is such an interesting time about how we're using machines. So are the students able to use I know we're not quite at artificial intelligence, but so much that we're able to use computers to do modeling, to do the kinds of work, and that it's moving in that in that area. Are you seeing a great deal of interest in that?
It totally depends on the school and the school district and the resources available to the school. There is a huge difference between a well-funded school and a not well-funded school.
Yeah.
There is also a huge difference between students who have parents who are professionals, who have access to labs, or even if they don't have access to labs, they know somebody who does, or who give their students the confidence to call UT and just cold call and say, I'm investigating this, can I come to your lab?
Exactly.
And who have the confidence to be rejected 10 times, 15 times and keep calling. And then you have the other students whose parents are not professionals, who do not know that this is a possibility for them.
Even knowing it's a possibility, Ingrid, and
which
that's
is huge.
To know, Bill Gates talks about how, because he happened to be in that particular school district, in that particular place of affluence that allowed him to have an early introduction to the beginnings of computing, allowed him to then go on and to be part of the Microsoft experiment about what he did. But that's because he was at a place where he intersected at that with the effort.
So you can always say that any student could reach a certain goal, but that's really not true. You have to have the environment. You have to have the opportunities. You have to have the encouragement. And there are always some students who will thrive despite all the obstacles.
Exactly.
But they are the exceptions.
Exactly. I was thinking about that, there are people that will say about negative encouragement and then say, that, oh, well.
Are we done?
Yeah, that was wonderful. Thank you.
That was a very quick half hour.